Now we're ready to get started. For those of you new to ITSM Academy, here's a quick overview. ITSM Academy is a full-service provider of ITSM education. We develop all content in-house, including all IDLE education, as well as process design, agile, and DevOps. Since 2003, we've trained and certified tens of thousands of students. Now let me introduce our speaker, Michael Cardinal. Mike has over 18 years experience in IT and education, having worked as a consultant, analyst, trainer, and teacher. A solution architect, IDLE expert, and certified process design engineer, Mike's resume spans several industries, including insurance, manufacturing, retail, food service, and education. Mike has also spent 20 years as an adjunct instructor and trainer, has spoken at several IT and academic events, and published white papers on how to begin an IT service management implementation. Good morning, Mike. Welcome.
Hey, Karen. Thank you. Appreciate that wonderful introduction, and thank you to everybody. Am I coming through okay, Karen?
Yes, perfectly.
Excellent. Good to hear. So yeah, thanks everybody, and appreciate your time today, and we deeply apologize if you got on last month and there were some back-end issues. We hopefully have taken care of all of those with the with Citrix. So we want to kind of cut through some of that kind of confusion today by looking at how we're going to understand and go about defining services. So if you don't know who I am, here I am. Karen gave an introduction, just a little better picture with me and my my famous mustache. So appreciate the time today again. So as many of you know, when I do these kind of webinars and have done them in the past, I like to start with some baselining in terms of terminology and a little bit of theory so that we can then move into how do we take that theory and apply it in the real world kind of situation, and go about actually defining services, mapping them, and then marketing those services. So let's head into this journey. So as with most things, services and how to define services really begins with the definitions. All things really base themselves out of this idea of a definition. So you start with a definition, and from there you kind of build and map upon or map to that definition. So let's start by talking about a basic concept of what a definition is and why we want to look at that. So and this may be a bit simplistic for everybody, but again, just kind of level setting here for everybody. So a definition, right, it's an exact statement or description of the nature, scope, or meaning of something. And if we're going to move forward with defining services, we have to understand sort of what the definition of the word service is, what it means to define a service, what factors go into that. So by having a clear definition of the word service as a starting point, you kind of set up three factors. One is the precision, or providing boundaries to the service. You kind of look at it from what's called falsifiability, or something being falsifiable. That is, the definition can be open to failure. So you want to make sure that things are clear to the definition and apply to the definition, and those things that don't apply then aren't services. So it's kind of a mapping exercise. And then as part of defining the service is it allows you to kind of decide what's the context of these services. Are we talking about a business type service? Are we talking about a technical type service? So these factors are all important in defining services. So I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but just again, level set. So when we talk about services, let's kind of step back a moment and look at it in a bigger context. So services are really one half of something called products. A product is anything that someone produces, right? So that's where the word comes from, product. And they really span a spectrum from goods to services. Goods are the more tangible kind of things that you're used to, and you can kind of see from the spectrum that I've laid out. From a pure goods standpoint, it's all those raw materials, salt, ore, wood, whatever. As you move across the spectrum, you put more and more human activity into the good, and you kind of process it, and you manipulate it, and you change it over time. So that when you land in the middle, right, it's more of that sort of made-to-order, custom kind of things. As you continue, you kind of start to remove the physical side and start shifting more over to the human side, so that when you get to the end in terms of pure service, you're really talking about things like teaching and consulting. These are activities that people do that don't have a physical outcome to them. The outcome, or the deliverable in a sense, is knowledge. And it's really hard to put your hands on knowledge. So this is really the two ends of the spectrum of products. Hard, fast, tangible, measurable kind of things on one end in the form of goods, and then the intangible, perishable, sort of non-measurable things in terms of services. So that's really kind of the spectrum we're talking about here. And you can also see goods are based on worth, where services are based on value. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. I've laid out some characteristics of each of those. You can kind of see how then they play that, the two ends of the spectrum. So when we're talking about IT produces both goods and services. The goods we produce are infrastructure, are applications, are technologies, those kind of things. The services that we produce are the intangible things, and that's really where service management plays, is on the right end of that spectrum. So let's talk a little bit about this concept of worth and price and value, so we can kind of see how we want to move away from the physical concept of a service to the more intangible concept of a service. So when we talk about worth and price and value, again, it forms sort of a spectrum here. On one end you have worth, and I pulled the definition here, right? So sufficiently good, important, or interesting to justify a specified action. That is, worth is something that is inherent to a good. It actually has some kind of logic or reason based. You know, something like gold has inherent worth because of lack of that good, right? Resource demand and capacities, supply, its security, you know, it's sacred, it's things that people desire, right? So it has some kind of inherent worth. As you move from worth, though, towards value, you start to bring in some other concepts. So something may have some worth, but what am I willing to pay for that item? That's where price comes in. So price is really a factor of what I'm willing to give up, or what someone else is willing to give up in an exchange of something. So price is really the equilibrium point between my willingness to buy something from you and your willingness to sell it to me. It's not simply just an economic factor, it's really a psychological factor. And the way that we kind of work in price is through this idea of currency. And I've often spoken throughout my career about the fact that different organizations work with different currencies. Some organization, their internal currency is money, right? So they keep track of budgeting. Other organizations, their currency is time. So how much time do I have to be able to do something? Some people, their currency is actual full-time employees. How many people are you willing to provide to me to get the work done? So it's really different factors, different ways to kind of make this exchange. The key thing about price is it's really only valid for that one transaction you make. I often use an example of a loaf of bread. If I'm hungry today and you have a loaf of bread, it's got a lot of inherent worth. I may be willing to pay a lot of price for it, you know, pay for a lot of it today, but tomorrow, after I've bought the bread and eaten it, well, I'm not as hungry. The worth is still there, but I may not be willing to pay as much for it tomorrow because it doesn't have the same value to me. And that kind of leads us to this idea of value, right? This is the regard that someone has for something that they see in terms of its importance, its purpose, or its usefulness. And what ITIL talks about in terms of value are these two concepts of utility and warranty. Does it meet the purpose that I need to in the loaf of bread? That is it going to stop my hunger? And then does it have the usefulness or the warranty? That is it a good loaf of bread? Was it baked right? It's not burnt. It's got all the ingredients that it's supposed to have, right? And notice that value is something that is more emotionally driven than something like worth or price. So what we want to do is when we're thinking about our services, we want to kind of shift away from the worth of things to the value of things. And that's really what ITIL is pointing us to, is that services are really two things: actions that we take for others and the value that those actions take or bring for someone. So here, finally, getting to that definition that ITIL provides us in terms of service. So a service is a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating outcomes, not outputs, customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks. Some other ways that I've used over time to kind of describe services is if you take sort of a dictionary definition of service, what you get is work done for others. Notice that both the definition that ITIL provides to us and that work done for others, there is no sort of tangibility inherent in the definition. And that's because services are not really tangible things, they're intangible. They're actions that you do for others by bringing value to them. So if I could accomplish something myself, I may not need a service. So you offering me a service has no basic value to me. But if I couldn't do it for myself, if I couldn't accomplish some outcome on my own and you were there to help me, then you may be providing a lot of value to me. And that's where this idea of services really comes to us. So some other ways we can kind of think about service and the definition of service is it gives people the ability to ... a business process or a business outcome, the ability to mail a letter, the ability to cash a check, the ability to log on to a system, the ability to do my accounting. That's really when we start thinking about this definition, right? It's something that gives me the ability to accomplish some outcome. Some other ways you can see here, you can think about services in terms of value for money. Services are things that make things more efficient, more effective, and more economical for people. That is, they bring value in terms of how we accomplish those things by making them better, faster, cheaper. The other thing that you want to think about in terms of services is when you go to define your services, think about that action side and think about the verbs first as opposed to the nouns. I see this a lot where organizations talk about the nouns: email, servers, other configuration items, applications. These aren't inherently themselves services, they're things, but what we do with them turns them into services. So email support, server maintenance, lost some examples there, sorry. Couple things that were told to me early on in my career in terms of thinking about services, and I've added them here, is services really actions that generate revenue, so people are willing to pay you for them, right? There's worth and price and value to them, but they're also understood by your grandmother, right? So they're they're described in clear, concise, plain English terms as opposed to very technical terms. And so that kind of leads to the statement at the bottom. Why is there no mention of technology in all of this? Well, that's because by its basic definition, even in ITIL, a service is an action, not a thing. All right, so keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, there's a couple of contexts that we can apply in terms of these services. So we can take that basic definition of service and say, all right, let's apply it to two contexts. The first one being business, the second one being IT or technology. So by its definition, a business service is really something, it's an action that is provided by a business service provider. Very basic definition, and sometimes I think organizations and people make way more complex definitions out of this idea of services than they need to. It's really very basic. It's an action that you take that is provided by someone from the business, right? And in and of itself, right, services and the context of that service is really made up of a number of things that make that action possible. So yes, we do need technology. It's not that the service itself is the technology, but we do need technology to bring the efficiency and the effectiveness in the economy. But we also need people, processes, and really there's a fourth one, information. So services are made up of a combination of more than just actions. They also have underpinning or underlying technologies, people, and process. Now, there are two types of business services that you might encounter. One are customer-facing services. These are the kind of business services that support business processes that are delivered to your end paying customer, sometimes what ITIL calls external customers. You can see it giving you kind of a list here. So your company may provide financial services or retail services or energy services or manufacturing services. Then there are the support services for business. These are non-technical support services. So these are things that the business uses but are not directly given out to end customers. Again, they're just there because they support the customer-facing services, and you can't work or you can't have the customer-facing services without the support services. So these are things like financial administration, legal administration, facilities, HR, payroll. These are things that most organizations, unless your basic service is being an HR management company, these are internal activities that your end customer does not see, but you have to do in order for the customer to receive the value out of those business services. So that's sort of a business service. And we have to start with business services because business services then drive which technology or technical services we need to have. So that's the next context, is this idea of IT service. Now, hopefully when looking at the slide, one of the things you might notice is the definition is pretty much the same. The difference is not in what the service is, but who provides it. That's really the key difference between a business service and an IT service. A business service is provided by the business, an IT service is provided by IT. But it uses the same definition, it uses the same context, they're the same two types of services, it's just being provided by a different type of organization. Right? There are still business processes that are being supported. There are still service level targets which are defined in service level agreements. Now, normally these kind of services are the ones that are provided from IT to the internal customers who are the business people. Your accountants, your lawyers, your salespeople, your store operators, whatever it may be. And you'll notice the difference here, right? These then tie themselves more to the technology that underpins these capabilities, collaboration, consulting, point of sale management. You'll notice that it does talk to the technology, but more importantly, it talks to the actions behind that technology. So it's not just point of sale, it's the management of the point of sale systems. It's not just CRM systems, it's the management of those CRM systems. And then the furthest sort of down the value chain as we talk about it is the set of support services. Again, an indirect set of services that make the customer-facing IT services possible. But even your internal customers, say your lawyers and your store managers or your associates, don't necessarily directly interface with these services. But if they're not there, then you can't accomplish what you're trying to accomplish in terms of the business outcomes. So this is where most IT people, when you ask them about services, this is where their mind goes immediately. Network, email, application, service desk. Yes, these are types of services, but they're not the front line types of services that are really what ITIL is talking about. They're one part of a chain of services and a chain of value that makes up the ability to deliver on the promises of your organization. So part of why I've been thinking about this for a long time is, again, I didn't start my life as an IT person. I came in as a business person into this context. I came in as a process and service person and saw that the context of IT services is really no different than the context of business services. It's just using different things to provide that service, or it's being provided by a different person. So it's always the same kind of end goal, is to make the organization as a whole better. So you note at the bottom I kind of put this statement there. We want to start thinking about IT services as really nothing more than a type of business service. It's just that the service is underpinned by technology as opposed to manual activities like we used to do back in the day, as they say. So you can kind of see this. You may be familiar with this diagram from ITIL if you've seen this, but the idea here is it's a hierarchy, right? It's a decomposition starting at the top with your external customers and working down towards IT, even though the delivery of the value comes from the bottom up. So we call this top-down design, bottom-up implementation, and that's really what ITIL wants you to think about, is start with your services from the top down, not from the bottom up. So don't immediately go to the server or the network. Start with what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and then work towards the technology, then establish that technology to bring value back up through the chain. Now, to help you along in terms of defining these services, we want to think about what is it that a business does that we're supporting. Well, every business, doesn't really matter what business it is, basically does 5 things. It creates goods and services, that's its main thing. It markets and sells those goods and services. It delivers those goods and services and the promises it makes around those. And once those things are delivered, it supports them, and it does all of the internal operational things to make sure that the other 4 things happen well. And when ITIL talks about services, it's not just talking about the 5th one or maybe the 4th and 5th one, it's talking about every single one of these bullets. Right? So the idea is when you're defining your services, you have to start here and answer the question that I have at the bottom. So which services, what things do you do in bullet number 5 that really support the other 4 areas? Those are your services. Those are your business services in particular. From your business services, then you can decompose into your technical services, right? So once I know my business services, then my technical services are those things that directly support those business services and don't stand as sort of, or don't operate as standalone independent kind of things, right? They do just kind of support, and you can see that support. So in defining these technical services, what we do is we start with the business service and we map a chain of outcomes to be able to provide that business service. We determine which of those things are more customer-facing, which are more support, which ones are more technical, which ones are more non-technical. We also want to think about service in a service relationship. So if there are what we call sub-services or secondary type services that may be wholly captured within a single service. And then, as I've kind of tried to bring in the whole presentation here, is let's move away from thinking about applications, systems, and infrastructure as services and start thinking more about the activities and the outcomes that we're supporting with those technologies. The other thing is, when you go to identify those technical services, you want to see words like support, maintenance, and management associated to those services. So for a long time, I've advocated that, you know, because a typical service that people use as an example is email. Email to me is a thing, it's not a service. Email support, email management, email maintenance, these are services that you provide. Email is the item that you're supporting, it's really a configuration item, right? So you want to kind of think about this difference and kind of take a different look at this. And I've known for a long time this is a very sort of out-of-the-box, controversial, different way of seeing things, but I've also seen the organizations that I've gotten to think down this line are much more successful with ITIL and their services than those organizations that don't kind of think this way. All right, so that's a lot of the theory kind of stuff. So let's talk about how we go about actually sort of following a method to take the concepts that I laid out and put them into practice. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. One way is a more informal way, and I think this is the way that most organizations go about it, right? So they go out and they say, okay, well, here I have this set of customers and they need X. We kind of document a set of requirements. We kind of design some service or good or product. We identify who's going to own that and support that. You know, what are the people, process, and technology? And lo and behold, we have a service. Or maybe even more informally, someone kind of, as I said, picks an application and goes, oh, that's a service, or picks email and says, that's a service. So this can succeed. It can succeed for the short term, but really what we want to do is kind of move away from some of this more informal definition and look for more formal ways of doing services. And you'll notice that if you look at this sort of sweep down through this chain, what you have here are the makings of a project. And that's because what we want to do is start moving away from sort of this ad hoc, informal, just kind of throw darts at the wall or pick things out of the air approach. Let's kind of start taking a methodology, a process, and let's run that process as part of a project, because that's really what defining services is about. It's really project work. And instead of using sort of an informal method, let's kind of take some best practices and use those to kind of set the stage for a more formal project-driven and process-driven approach to actually defining our services. So start by defining your market. What is it that, you know, you're answering the question, who are we as a business? Are we a retail business? Are we an energy business? Are we a food service business? What are you? Who are your customers? Not everyone in the world is your customer, right? Not everyone in the world needs your services or needs your goods. So identify who those people are and then talk to them about their needs. Instead of just providing them with something and saying, you know, tell us if you like it, think about their needs. There's a really famous statement from Steve Jobs who said, you know, people didn't know they needed Apple products until I showed it to them, which was more Steve Jobs being Steve Jobs and kind of self-promoting himself. He recognized, if you really know him, he recognized that people have needs. They don't know how to express them. That's really the problem. What you need to do as part of defining services is go out there and help your customer express their needs. How do you do that? Well, instead of just asking a question, what do you want? Ask them a different question. Ask them, what do you do every day? What are your business processes? What do you try to accomplish at the end of the day? And when they explain that to you, look for opportunities where technology could help them. Oh, if there were a way that I could do activity X quicker and faster and more repetitive, would you be interested in that? Oh yeah, I'd love that. That's a service, right? Right there is a service opportunity. Then what you do is you take those kind of opportunities and you quantify them using outcomes. Once you understand what the particular outcomes, and outcomes take intangibles and turn them into tangibles by putting a measure against them, then you can start to sort of say, okay, here's the service, it's a business service or a technical service, it's a support service or a customer-facing service. Then what you do is you match the two together, because an opportunity is really nothing more than a market space. And a market space is defined as taking a need from a particular customer and the ability to do something and matching those together. So you're really taking a capability that you have to fulfill some need and the need, and you're matching them up together. Then what you have is the sort of confluence of the services and the outcomes together. From there, you then start to decompose that using service models, and from there, you define service units and packages. So let's kind of walk through some of that a little bit more. So you may or may not be familiar with how to do an outcome, but I don't see a lot of organizations doing this, and they really should. They really should sit down and write out these outcomes. And it's really not that hard to do an outcome, especially because there is a template that you really can follow to do this. So it's really composed of three parts. What is it that you're trying to do? That is the desired outcome. In this case, I gave you an example, right? Transport natural gas safely to storage locations. The next thing is understanding what the measure of that is. Are you looking at volumes of natural gas? Are you looking at length of time? Are you looking at weight? Are you looking at speed? What is that sort of measure? And then the front part is your directionality. Are you trying to increase that? Are you trying to decrease that? Are you trying to maintain, keep status quo? You take these three things, you put them together in a fairly simple statement, and here is a business outcome, right? So increase the amount of natural gas transported safely to storage locations. This, by using this outcome format, now I can start to decompose from here and sort of build a hierarchy of service capabilities, right? So in terms of something like natural gas transportation, I'm going to have to understand, okay, how is natural gas transported? How do we know what the amount is? So there's going to be some kind of measurement device to tell me the amount of natural gas. That's a technology. I can manage and maintain technology. So let's look at that. I can measure safety. I can determine the increase, decrease. Right, so I start kind of decomposing and doing some critical thinking on this, and then once I have that, then I can start to look at a couple things. First, I can say, do I have anything in the services I already provide that can help do that? And if I don't, can I build it? Can I create a service that will help me do that? So that kind of leads you to the next step, right, is understanding what are all the parts and pieces that make up this service, what are all the actions that I need to take in order to be able to deliver this. Now below this, there's got to be some kind of business process for transporting gas, so I need to understand that. I then need to understand what the non-technical support mechanisms are for that. I then need to understand what technologies are involved, and finally I need to understand how I'm going to maintain those technologies. A good way to help you kind of see that bigger picture is to tie into business relationship management. So that's really the role of business relationship management, is to be at that 100,000 foot level, to be able to see all the way from the business back to technology and understand, do we have these capabilities already? And if we do, how do we provide them to the customer? And if we don't, how do we get them in place to deliver them to the customer? All right, so if we take that, and I understand that was very high level and there's a lot more detail on ITIL. Given an hour for a webinar, it's very difficult to get into a lot of the detail of the defining, and ITIL does a great job of kind of reading through that. So go to the service strategy book, read more in terms of that, that process. So you kind of have to decompose, starting with business services, moving down to technical services, and then that allows you to then map down even further into your configuration. So you'll notice here, it looks very similar to the diagram that we talked about earlier, but in this case, we're not talking about the process by which we define the services, but we're looking at the parts and elements that make up the service itself. So as I said, we start with the needs of the business. So what is the business process or business outcome that we're trying to identify? From there, we define the business services. From there, we identify how we're going to support those business and technical services. That comes in the form of processes. Those three things then make up a part of the service called the dynamics. And so we want to kind of understand, what are the actions and activities that make this service possible first, before we get down into the technical thing. And again, IT people have a tendency to dive right down into the bottom, but really, remember, top down, bottom up. Once I understand what it is the business is trying to accomplish, what services we need to provide them to do that, what processes we need to have in place to be able to support those services, then I can start looking at the technologies. And that's where I start understanding, okay, which systems support the processes that support the services that support the business. Then I can look at what are the functional things about those systems and the non-functional things about those systems that I need to have. That then drives my technical specifications. Now, that bottom part really then gives us the structure of the service. So services are really made up of two parts. The dynamics, that is, the actions and processes that the service allows us to do, and then the structure, that is, the physical elements that allow us to manage and support and deliver on those processes, services, and business. Now, this may look familiar to some people who've done requirements gathering, because really that's all this is, right? A service is really nothing more than laying out the set of requirements needed or the needs needed, and then building the dynamics for those needs and the structure for those needs. And again, just like we do when we're building an application as part of a project, we should be building services in the exact same methodology. And so I know, ITSM Academy does a great job of training people on things like Agile Service Management. This is where Agile Service Management can really come in, right? Because you can speed this process up by using things like Agile, right? It's the same methodology. You gather these needs. You're just doing it in a much quicker form. So if you're not familiar with it, this is, again, from ITIL. This is what a typical service dynamics map looks like. So you'll notice that what these people have done, what the organization has done, is they've sat down and thought through the steps that someone does when they're sort of engaging some kind of e-commerce website. So the first thing I have to be able to do is support their ability to shop, right? So you notice shopping, not shop, not cart, but shopping. So this is really that verb format that I was talking about. So I first have to present them with some choices. The second thing is I have to give them a way to be able to select. Again, there's that verb. The verb is supported by the nouns, right? The shopping cart, the choices, those kind of things, checkout. And if you follow this through, you can kind of see what has been laid out are the processes, the actions, and the outcomes to enable someone to shop, to shop online, to purchase things and have it shipped to their home. Once we have this sort of service dynamics, then we can start thinking about the service structure. And this is where the technology comes into play. So once I have that dynamics, which is really that sort of purple box at the top, then I can start saying, okay, one of the things I have to do is have a shopping cart. Okay, well, how would I present a shopping cart online? If I can't give them a physical shopping cart, I have to give them a virtual shopping cart. Can we create an application that sort of models or mocks a physical shopping cart idea or metaphor, and therefore allows them to accomplish the same outcomes but using technology? If you're been in the industry for a while, this is where the whole idea of the desktop came from, right? We talk about desktop. Well, desktop was really, in the early days of graphical interfaces, really just that. They were literally trying to copy what a person's desk looked like onto the screen. And so the idea of a wastebasket and a file cabinet and a ink blotter and a notepad, all of these things that we take for granted were really driven out of thinking through service dynamics and then trying to model the physical world of those dynamics into a virtual or technological structure. And so the same principles that applied then still apply now. So as we decompose, then you can start to see this is where the infrastructure, this is where our applications and our networks and our data start to come in. And then below that, you can see the process area, really. So who's going to support this infrastructure, what teams, what processes are they going to use? And again, that's where a lot of ITIL comes in terms of things like incident management and problem management and change management. All right, so you start with this dynamics, you move down to the structure, and you do a decomposition model. Now, I want to offer up, that's sort of the ITIL approach. I want to offer up sort of another way to follow sort of a formalized, well, it's kind of in between an informal and formal approach to doing service mapping. And getting to sort of the same part, same place, might be a little bit easier for people to digest. And this is going all the way back to the founding fathers of things like ITIL, in fact, William Edwards Deming. So Deming and the famous plan, do, check, act cycle is really the most basic process that anyone ever does. Everything we do follows a basic plan, do, check, act cycle. And what Deming taught us is, question always comes up. Okay, so he says do planning. How do I do planning? Well, Deming kind of answers with a question, or answers with sort of a redundant answer, a bit sarcastic, I guess, or cynical, is, well, you plan the planning, and then you do the planning, and then you check the planning, and then you act on the planning. Well, how do I do? Well, you plan the doing, you do the doing, you check the doing, you act. And so what you do is you get this sort of recursive methodology here, and you just keep decomposing this. And when you do this, by starting with your business services, you decompose this, at some point in time you cross this line. And what happens when you're taking these verbs and you're kind of decomposing these actions is you get to a statement like, hey, we need to provision the laptop. That's one of the actions that falls under doing. Now I have crossed over this line from the dynamics at the top to the structure at the bottom, right? So now I can say, okay, well, what makes up a laptop? I have to provision it. Now I know my configuration items, laptops. Well, what makes up a laptop? And this is where you have to kind of make some decisions in your organization. Am I going to consider the laptop as a whole something I call a super configuration item? Is it, a category of configuration items, or am I going to decompose the laptop even further? So a laptop is made up of, the physical box itself, the tablet aspect of it. There is a motherboard, there's a hard drive or a solid state drive, there's memory, and you have to kind of decide how far down you decompose. Now, what helps you decide how far down to decompose? How much governance and control you want to do on those configuration items. How much time, effort, and money do you want to spend tracking the amount of memory in laptops? If that's important to you, then you should track that and it becomes part of your configuration items. If it's not important to you, then don't track it. And ITIL won't stop you from saying that or doing that. It actually recommends that's how you think. So give you a little bit more clear example here. So what I do with organizations is I kind of whiteboard this out. And I lay out on a whiteboard, plan, do, check, act. And then I just simply ask them about activities they do. So here's an example of I worked with an organization around their testing capabilities in their test center. So I said, what are the kind of planning activities that you do? Well, we develop testing strategies, we architect the test center. Okay, and there was a whole bunch more. And then I take the do and I say, okay, what kind of doing things you do? Well, we establish test environments and we build the test systems. And I went all the way across checking and acting. And then I took each of those and I said, can we decompose developing into further planning, doing, checking, acting? Can we further decompose architecting into planning, doing, checking, acting? And you just keep decomposing these until you get to that point where someone says, oh, well, one of the doing activities is to re-image the test system. I've now crossed over the line from my dynamics into the structure of my service, and the structure really tells me my configuration items. So I was then able to kind of say, okay, here are your configuration items that make up your test systems, and without having to actually do any auto discovery, and within a few weeks we'd already defined the whole service and all of the configuration items. The other thing that happened here is quite amazing, because when this organization sat back and it looked at this, it said, you know what? We don't actually do any testing. They'd always thought of themselves as people who actually do the testing. And when they kind of laid out this, they started to realize that, no, they're not the testers. What they really were real estate agents for test environments. They leased space so that others could do testing. And it was really an eye-opening moment for them when they started to see things like this. The other thing they saw is one of the activities that they laid out that they do is send out a monthly communication, a monthly newsletter. So I started to ask them, I said, is that really the core things that you do? Is that really what you do? Well, no, we're really testing, we lease these test systems and we set up these spaces. And again, they started to recognize that, hey, doing communications is not sort of a core service we provide. It's not an activity that we really support. I said, well, is there somewhere else in the organization that actually does this? Yeah, the communications team. Okay, so here's what we do. We take that idea and we go to the communications team and we set up an operating level agreement with them. And this is where your OLAs come in. And you say, you guys are the communications people. If we provided you monthly with some content, would you put it into a nice newsletter and send it out on our behalf? They said, yes, that's what we do. So we started to move activities that were redundant within this testing area to the places who use those as core services for themselves, and that way we were able to kind of narrow in on what this test area did and what they did really well. And that way they were able to sort of not have to be everyone to everything to everyone. They were able to really narrow in and focus on what they do. So it was really very eye-opening, and I suggest in following this sort of very simple methodology, and I'm very willing to have conversations in more depth with people about how I did this, you'll find that there'll be some big changes in your organization. So here's an example of the kind of things that I've done before around this. This is for an insurance organization. So you kind of see how I've taken that idea of the decomposition. I was able to start and say, okay, one of the things they do is sell auto insurance. How do they do that? Through sales channels, marketing, legal. I then decompose sales channel below the waterline. So I moved from the activities to the dynamics, or from the dynamics to the structure, excuse me. There were things like get a quote, and application, where I submit an application. That then led me to internet rate quote, enterprise apps, and on down through. And I was able to sort of decompose this hierarchy for a business service. I then did the same thing with a technical service. And so what I did was I said, okay, I have this technical aspect, this area called network, and then we looked at, okay, what are the activities you do around the hardware, what are the activities you do around the software, what are the areas you do around the network, and then we were able to sort of decompose, just using Visio, down to what the configuration items were, and then it was fairly easy for them to say, okay, routers. Let's do a particular discovery just on routers. Let's do a particular discovery just on switches or on CorpNet or on the sniffers. Instead of sort of dumping everything out of discovery, they were able to then narrow in and focus in a very quick way on not only what the services were, but all of their configuration items as well. The final piece of the puzzle is, once you've kind of worked through defining and designing these services using what I hope are fairly straightforward, simple approaches, you then have to tell people about it. And that's where we key into things like the portfolio and the catalog. Again, a lot of organizations see these things as menus. More importantly, the portfolio and the catalog are marketing tools, right? So they're ways for you to kind of take your capabilities, and this is what Steve Jobs was talking about, right? He was really talking about, hey, in order for people to be aware of Apple products, we have to put them out in front of them. Otherwise, they won't know we have these capabilities. He was talking about, and he probably wouldn't use those terms, really a service portfolio and a service catalog. Right? The portfolio, that's a little bit higher level. It's really for looking into the future. It's for decision making, but it does help you kind of talk to customers about, yeah, we do have these capabilities. Again, the testing area could have said, communications, we have somebody that you can work with to do that. Go ahead and go with them. And we'll be able to help you. But if it comes to testing, that's really where we can help you. Again, organizations like Tech Systems or ITSM Academy, these same kind of things, right, is, hey, we may say, yeah, we can do that, but this other thing, that's really, we'll point you in a good direction to somebody who's a good partner with us, but here's what we do, here's what we don't do. And then the catalog is really that marketing tool of not only what do we offer you today, but what are all the parts and pieces that make that up? How do we deliver that to organizations? And how do we keep them coming back to us for more? Right? So you take all of your services and you put them into this portfolio. You manage them through their life cycle using the portfolio, so you can kind of market to people where these services are, where they are in their development, where they are in their life cycle, what new things are coming, what things are being retired. And then finally, you kind of package it all up and make it desirable to your customers, right? Think about what ways, and the food service industry has done this great, right? So combo number one, combo number two, that's really the kind of thing we're talking about. How do we package up the services and make them more palatable to our customers? So what are some core things that we could do? What are some support things that we can do? What levels of service that we can offer as a package to the organization, to a customer as a whole, and kind of sell them on a more complete picture instead of selling them as these sort of one-off kind of things. How do you get to those service packages? Well, it's really a combination of various service levels matched to sets of activities and lines of service or business capabilities. So you might offer up the ability to manage funds to certain service levels. That might be one service package. You might mix in the ability to manage funds with future stock trading capabilities, with advisement and consulting services, all at different service levels for service package number two. Right, so the idea is to think outside the box, think about ways that we can make IT services in particular more attractive to the business, as opposed to simply seeing us as technology providers, but rather providing them value in a way that they can use these services to drive their own activities daily and therefore generate more revenue for the organization as a whole, greater customer service, more success for everybody. I know I've gone very quickly. This is a very complex subject. You can go into a lot of depth. I just wanted to kind of touch upon this at a high level and give you a sense of the kind of things that you need to do. So just in summary, before we get to some quick questions, remember, it starts with a clear definition of what a service is, ties to value, understand the context in which you're doing the service, right? Don't just do it ad hoc. Use a particular process or methodology, and I showed you a couple of how to do those. Execute those within projects, whether that's a waterfall, SDLC, or agile methodology. Understand the outcomes that you're ultimately trying to achieve. Visualize them. Don't just talk about them, but visualize them, and then use the portfolio and the catalog to bring them to your customers. Ultimately, it's about driving excitement and desire for what you can do to help the business and to help your end customers. Whew. All right, so here's my contact information. I'm going to turn it back over to Karen. I know she's got some things to close us out.
Thank you, Mike. And boy, how aptly you named that, services cutting through the confusion. Thank you for breaking that down for us like that. That was fantastic. Lots of information there. We got a couple of things first before we get to the Q&A. So those of you that have questions, please put them please chat them into us now. And for those of you that need to drop off, I would just like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, September 15th, when Eddie Vidal, he's the Managing Director of EJV Corporation, is going to join us. And Eddie's presentation is titled Single Point of Contact, SPOC, One Goal, One Journey to the Road to Success. And Eddie says that the road to success for organizational change is often met with roadblocks and detours, rarely following a straight, simple path. And don't we know that? Changing long-standing processes and team members' roles to reach the ultimate goal of single point of contact is a challenging journey. And in Eddie's session, attendees will learn how one organization with 35,000 customers made massive improvements through SPOC, find out how to combine several service desks into one, cross-utilize team members, lower your abandon rate, create scalability to support large projects, and more. So hopefully you can join us for that. My colleague, Eric Montijo, is here today to share some information. Good morning, Eric.
Well, good morning, Karen. How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good, good. Hey, Mike, that was, wow, that was a great webinar. That was just, I love when you do webinars, honestly. And I'm just going to gush over you for a second. It's awesome. I love the way you break things down, and it's very down to earth. So I love your webinars. I'll keep it at that. This webinar especially kind of makes me really excited. Let me tell you why. The buzzword in IT these days is DevOps. How do we do DevOps? How do we manage it? What is it even? DevOps is a phenomenon that breaks down the silo walls between ops and dev, giving you continuous integration in your app development, which minimizes your time to market. This is great and helps you deliver a lot of value to your customers, both internal and external, quickly and efficiently. But I think there's this misconception, especially in a cloud dev environment, that IT is just causing this bottleneck in the model because of the perceived bureaucracy of idle. Here's the thing. Nothing says idle has to be bureaucratic, first off. ITSM needs to move into an agile space to succeed using DevOps. Reducing the waste in your process, becoming lean, understanding user cases, these things become paramount in breaking down these silo walls. Your IT is focused on delivering better value to the business infrastructure and security, and your dev is focused on delivering and implementing code, which is, the way it should be, right? So if you're interested in how ITSM, and that means idle, can align with Agile, you need to take Certified Agile Service Manager. If you're a process owner and you need to figure out the how of making these ITSM processes more agile, you need to take Certified Agile Process Owner. Pretty straightforward. Luckily for you gals and guys, we're having a buy one, get one free right now on these two classes. I want your service managers to take CASM. I want your process owners to take CAPO. And with this BOGO, you can do that without breaking the training budget. If you're thinking about DevOps at all and you're in idle, you need to take these classes. I said it, you need these classes to break down these walls, save your process people some time and headaches. Go onto the website, itsmacademy.com. There's a big red banner that shows the coupon code, which is ABOGO2016, and the upcoming dates. We've got a class coming up in September. We've got another, I believe that's the service manager class, or I'm sorry, the process owner class, and that's September 20th through 23rd, and then CASM is coming up in January 31st. And for those interested in learning more about DevOps, we've actually popped up some physical classes, which everybody's been asking for. The first one's coming up in Boston on September 27th. So if you happen to be in the Boston area and you want to take DevOps with us, come on down September 27th. We've got another banner. It's the second one. Has a big old Boston logo right on it. So, but I'll get off my podium now. Thanks again, Mike. It's been a pleasure as always. And back to you, Karen.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, can you chat that into us also?
That is absolutely a possibility.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, Mike, are you ready for some questions?
Yeah, sorry I went a little long, so I'll stay on for questions, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So we have a question from John, and John wants to know, why is there so little information out there related to service architecture models in this space today?
Yeah, so it's out there. You just have to do a little bit of work to find it. Obviously, ITIL has some things, and perhaps people haven't read as deeply into service strategy as they need to. A lot of this that I've kind of come up with really comes from other industries. So one of the things you might do is look at how non-IT organizations define services and look at service architecting. So look to manufacturing, look to retail in particular, food service in particular, those kind of organizations and how they do that. I do believe there's some modeling and architecture kind of things out there that may not quite exist yet for IT.
Thank you, Mike. I have a question for you from Prince. How do we effective services in today's agile DevOps world, and the right way to build SLAs and OLAs in this context, and what to look for in the selection of tools and ensure compliance and KPIs that need to be monitored and reported against?
So first off, I have a golden rule that a lot of people know, which is no tools before the rules, right? So the idea is you really have to kind of follow these methodologies as ITIL and other methods kind of lay out to understand first the services that you're providing, the actions that you're supporting. That then will sort of naturally show you where your SLAs and OLAs need to be, as I used in the example, right? So as this test area said, hey, communications team, can you do this work for us? That is the signal of someone asking for a service. All you have to do then is set up those OLAs that have the expectation that we need to provide you with the content by the 15th of the month so that you can send the newsletter out by the 1st, right? That's an OLA. It's a simple OLA, but that's an OLA, right? So it kind of comes out naturally. Then once you have your dynamics and your structure, again, you look for different types of measures that are going to help you support that. I think I did a webinar, I know I did a presentation at the Fusion conference all about measurements and metrics, and can provide that that goes into more depth around that side of it.
Thank you, Mike. There's a lot of thank you for a great webinar and kudos in here as well. And you have one for Lisa that says, thank you, Mike. Amazing that you can say something I've known for a decade or more and make it fresh again. So just wanted to share.
Well, I try, Lisa.
I just want to share that with you too. Matt has a question. He says, what happens if you don't define your services? Why not just leave that element of customer explanation / interruption up to the organizations that deal directly with internal customers, such as the applications team, the infrastructure, hosting teams, etc.?
Well, so you got a couple things going on there. First off, customers don't, your everyday customer for an organization doesn't deal directly with the technology kind of stuff. They interact with it, but they don't understand, nor do they sort of see what it takes to make that technology available. And that's part of that definition of from ITIL, without the ownership of costs and risks, right? We want to keep them out of the kitchen, as it were. We don't need them to see how we slice the carrots. So that's the first thing is, right, you don't want them to see some of that depth. The second thing is, we're all part of a value chain. We're all working for the same goal. IT exists to serve the needs of the business. Remember, in your organization, if there were no sort of business side to the organization, there'd be no need for IT, because you'd have nothing to, no one using the technology, no need to support the technology that's not being used. So the idea is we're all in the same boat, let's all row in the same direction and be part of this bigger value chain and see ourselves as part of delivering this value for the organization as a whole.
Right, exactly. Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Lynn had a question, and it went kind of back towards the beginning of your presentation. Sure. And said, when you were talking about the verb-noun format, and Lynn is saying, looking for other examples of how to use the verb-noun format for service. Do you have any?
Yeah, so what you're going to do is when you're sitting down to understand the business processes, right, so you're going to ask your customers, okay, what is it that you do every day? And let's take, like an accounting example. So you go to the accounting department and they say, well, one of the things that we do is, manage accounts payable. All right, well, there's your verb-noun format, right? So they manage, that's the verb, accounts payable. So that's what I was talking about, is identifying the service then. Now I have a basis that I can go from. Okay, they want the ability to manage accounts payable. Now, and I didn't really touch upon this so much, but when you name the service, you don't necessarily have to keep that noun-verb format, but certainly in identifying what are your services, you want to use that as a way to identify them. And then once you have that, you can give it an appropriate name, right? If you just want to call it accounts payable support or accounts payable management, right, reverse the two, now you have a good name for the service that represents the ability to. I would suggest when you write a definition or a description of the service that you actually use that format, the ability to manage accounts payable. The accounting people will understand what it is, you understand what it is, now you're all on the same page as to what you're doing. As I just said, you're in the same boat and you're rowing in the same direction.
I like that analogy, yeah. I definitely like that analogy. And Mike has a question for you, Mike. Mike finds the transition from service process and service structure, it gets a bit gray. Example, customer transactions. Both a process but very system related. Is the breakpoint that critical, or does it flex based on the project?
Yeah, it really does flex based on the project. I was trying to give you sort of a guide or an approach, but you're going to have to work within your own organization to kind of determine where that line is crossed. But don't get too hung up on it at first. just remember the idea is to work from the top down, not from the bottom up, because here's what would happen if you work from the bottom up is you'd get to this point where you'd see customer transactions and you'd always think of that as related to technology. But your customers may see that in a very different light, and ultimately what ITIL is trying to point us to and what I advocate is you have to define services through the eyes and the lenses of your customers, not through the eyes and the lens of IT, right? So by starting from the bottom up, you're really narrowing your focus only to technology where they may have a very different perspective on things. So start from the top down, see their perspective, and then find where that crossover between the dynamics or process and the configuration items goes. It's not going to be a straight line. It is going to be kind of a wiggly zaggly line.
Okay, a wiggly zaggly line.
Yeah.
Okay, ready.
Just made that up.
Yeah, I like that. Craig has a question for you. He wants to know if you've read the book All Services All the Time, How Business Services Serve Your Business by Doug McDavid.
I have not, so that sounds very interesting. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. Sorry.
That's okay. Craig is recommending. He was just saying, and if so, can you recommend it as a strong resource to put services into perspective for people who struggle with the term services? What's his comment on that?
I probably could once I read it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Those are all the questions that we have right now, Mike. So if anybody else has another question, if you could just chat it in right now, we will get to that for you as we wrap up. And just again, another reminder, September 15th, Eddie Vidal will be here, and Eddie's presentation will be single point of contact, one goal, one journey to the road to success. We'll send you an invitation for that next webinar and look forward to having you join us. And let me just take one more check. I don't see any other questions here, so I think we're good there, Mike.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you. It's been a pleasure as always. We certainly love having you here and presenting with us. So thank you so much for doing that again. And as, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I didn't say anything. Sorry.
Okay. I thought you
background noise. Yeah, background noise.
And as you log out, please take a minute to complete the post-webinar survey. This survey really gives you the opportunity to request any webinar topics that you'd like to see presented, and we do keep track of that, and we do bring those into the webinar process for you as well. So again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. Thanks again, Mike.
Bye.